Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm not sure if I am live. Everything's good. See, we've got 2 people subscribed. 4 people, my correction. This might be the most punctual I've ever been in my life. Nonetheless, it's the lockdown. We have nothing else to do besides be punctual. We'll get right into it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Firstly, I'd like to thank the MSA Union, specifically Anwar and Amara, for putting this together, and my brother for nominating me for this topic. I know it is a sensitive topic. I know people are going to have a lot of questions, and I will address them at the end. And before I go further, I want to introduce myself and explain my involvement with the MSA and who my family are and where we come from. So, Jidwan and Mo. So, firstly, my grandfather, Luqmaan Manjra, was one of the founding members of the Arabic Study Circle, which was the founding organization for all the other active Muslim organizations like the MYM and the MSA. They founded this back in the 60s, and it just kind of grew from there. So that's where it all started off. Father was part of the MYM and chairman during the late 70s, early 80s. Elder brother and sister were also involved in the MSA at the Wits University and UKZN, or well, Natal, as it was back in the early 2000s. My sister and I were also involved in the MSA until about 8 years ago. We were present at the 2012-2013 revival of the current MSA Union, where we had a series of camps and meetings across national MSA bodies. It was quite a honor and pleasure to have been there, and it's very heartwarming to see that those structures that were put in place all those years ago are still there today. Obviously, technology has also made communication much easier. WhatsApp being, we're having a WhatsApp group and people constantly, in conversations and keeping in touch with different generations. I would consider us a little bit of an older generation, having been at university and being chairman between 2011 and 2012, which is up until about 2013 when all the revivals were taking place. And it's so just a bit of background in terms of who we are and my involvement with the MSA. So I was there present at all those meetings, and it really is nice to see that everything has continued. And I like this concept of these lockdown lectures. I think that they'll be useful. Anyone who has questions, if you want, just pop the question up here on the side, and if I can address it without breaking my chain of thought, I'll do that. Otherwise, we'll come to it at the end. But let's get straight into it. Got a couple of notes on my phone because I have severe ADHD. My credentials, let's go through that. Why am I qualified to be sitting here at this desk on this evening to be lecturing to you about firearms and so on and so forth? So firstly, as the picture and the graphic had stated, I currently own my own gun shop. I am a gun shop owner. And it all started, I would say, at way before the legal age of 21, which is the actual age where you need to be the minimum age to be able to own a firearm in South Africa. It started off, it stemmed from a passion, for self-preservation, I can call it that, self-defense, being involved in martial arts at a very, very young age, starting off with karate, and it just grew. From there, it kind of grew into mixed martial arts, which everybody knows, whoever knows me, I was quite involved in that. I competed and so on and so forth. Up until about a year ago, I was still training. And then naturally, the natural progression from there was that it led onto then self-defense or self-preservation using weapons. And it was never a case of being an extremist or, as the Western term have coined it, jihadist or anything else like that. It was just a passion that grew, that stemmed from this need of self-preservation and self-defense. And as soon as I was of the legal age, I got involved in firearms. It was a passion that my brother and I were interested in. And we followed on through. Bought our first weapon, got involved in sport shooting, obviously all within the legal realm of things. And it just grew from there. And I then started taking it a bit more seriously, even though I wasn't making a career out of it at that point. I was involved in other types of business. And in my free time, I would be at the range shooting, and then eventually became a thing where friends and family who wanted to learn how to shoot and learn more about firearms would ask me to take them to the range, and I would, and it just kind of grew from there. So even before getting the official qualification of instructor, I was already teaching people about firearms, how to safely use them on the range. It then grew to a point where an opportunity was given to me. I was in between a career change, and an opportunity was given to me by a friend of mine who's now late. And he offered me a job at a gun shop. And he said, listen, you're quite passionate about this. Why don't you get involved? And I took the opportunity with both hands. And without getting into too much detail about what happened from there, I worked at a gun shop for 2.5 years. Those 2.5 years, the safety, I traveled a lot. I attended events, international events. I attended local events. I interacted with customers and clients and people within the industry who I never thought I'd interact with. I learned a hell of a lot. And it really opened my mind a lot to a lot of different concepts. And it then grew to a point where I felt there was a need for me to leave where I was, and I had enough in terms of knowledge and experience to be able to go out on my own. And shukar, alhamdulillah, things have worked out. It has been an extremely long road. Those who are watching and those who know who I am, you've been following my progress on social media and so on and so forth. And I've kind of reached the point that I wanted to all my life. So in terms of my credentials, gun shop owner, and I've given you the whole journey up until that point. Like I said as well, advanced level firearms instructor, don't worry about the advanced, that's just terminology, but it's just to show that how seriously I've taken this and how passionate I was about it. Qualified firearms instructor, there's an organization based in Johannesburg called the International Firearms Training Academy, which is the organization responsible for managing or kind of controlling the industry in terms of all the training material and everything else. From there onwards, Glock armourer. So for those of you who don't know Glock, and this, we can have countless conversations about this, but Glock is a firearm type. It's a make of firearm, like how you get a Mercedes-Benz in terms of a vehicle. So Glock is the Mercedes-Benz and the vehicle is the gun. Glock, arguably the most popular handgun, at least on the planet, used by most law enforcement agencies worldwide. So they have representation in South Africa, who are the local importers, and they offer a course where they teach you to become an armourer. So an armourer, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, in other words, a gunsmith, a person who's qualified to be able to work, maintain, strip, clean, and change parts on a firearm, which is quite important. A firearm in that sense is like anything else you buy. With the wear and tear, and for any other reason that you might have, you want to change parts and accessories on it. It's like a washing machine. Every couple of years, you've got to replace parts. It's a vehicle. You've got to change brakes, tires, gearbox, and all those type of things. So I'm qualified by Glock South Africa to be able to strip, maintain, and work on firearms. Dedicated sports shooter. So dedicated sports shooter is meaning that I'm accredited with an accredited organization who has been authorized by government to offer this course to individuals. There is a qualification for that. You have to do an online exam. You have to participate regularly in sports shooting events and accumulate points to make this level of what they call a dedicated sportsman. The benefit of being a dedicated sportsman is that you get to own more firearms, and you get to own types of firearms that you wouldn't normally be able to own, which is a good thing. You don't want any kind of random person owning specific type of firearms. However, if you are affiliated and accredited with a registered organization and you go through the processes, you are able to license certain types of firearm for sport shooting and only for sport shooting. So just a bit of my credentials and how a framework in terms of why it's important to own a firearm in South Africa. So I'm sure most people, everybody listening to this video right now, stays in South Africa, and we're all aware that South Africa is, if not the highest, has one of the highest crime rates in the world. And we can get into a lot of political and socioeconomic reasons for this, but the facts are the facts. South Africa is one of the most dangerous places in the world. There's no need to even pull out statistic evidence for this. It's quite evident. Everybody knows this. But I thought I'd just put out an article that's verified from a valid media outlet, just in terms of the crime statistics from the 1st of April 2018 to the 31st of March 2019. So they've broken it down into different categories, and I'm just going to read it to you. I couldn't memorize it. So for 2019, under the category of contact crime includes murder, attempted murder, sexual offenses, and common assault and robbery. So big ones, really violent crime. In 2019, there were 617,210 cases of contact crime alone. Now note, this article is giving you information, 2.5% increase from the previous year. Contact-related crimes, this is now including arson, malicious injury to property, 117,172. This is 1.5% increase since 2018. And they've got another couple of minor crimes which are also sitting in the 500,000 bracket. So what I want to point out is that you're sitting with a statistic in South Africa of reported incidents of more than 500,000 incidents in 1 year. That's in 12 months, which is significant. There are other reports that we can pull out in terms of the murder rate and the levels of rape and gender-based violence and so on and so forth. And we can go on about this. So where I'm going with this is that I don't need to sit here and convince you that there's a high crime rate in South Africa. You know that the challenges that we face. Even if you as an individual haven't been affected by it personally, I can almost guarantee you can give us a story right now about a family member, a friend, somebody you know who's been affected by crime somehow. Any level of crime, from petty muggings to violent home invasions to hijackings to kidnapping. And let's be quite frank about it. It's not getting better. It's only getting worse. Let's be honest about this. We can have a separate discussion about this individually on a one-on-one basis if someone wants to challenge. But I think that we can all kind of agree that things aren't getting better and things are quite bad at the moment. And I think that we can also comfortably say that nobody is exempt. Race, religion, culture, creed, everybody at some point. As a matter of fact, some people might think that by living in an upper class area, or maybe because you live a higher standard of living, you would be exempt from it. Becomes more attractive for them because they have more to gain by attacking you. I'm not going to get too much into it. I just want you to set a framework for understanding that we do have a big problem in South Africa when it comes to crime. And it is also kind of how my passion developed in terms of getting involved with firearms and martial arts and that type of thing. And it's just a gradual process. I want to talk about the word, which is not entirely related, but it's something we must talk on, and it'll probably answer a few questions. Globally, there's, with incidents happening in America where there's mass shootings and Muslim people are constantly being labeled as terrorists and extremists, and Middle Eastern people in general being constantly stereotyped and generalized about being jihadists and so on and so forth. It's a difficult thing. We don't have that much of a problem in South Africa because we have bigger issues, and I think we are a bit more religiously tolerant of each other and a bit more understanding, whereas other countries, other first world countries, aren't as understanding. So we don't really have that problem here of extremism. We had our individual cases and stuff, but nothing serious. But globally, there is a huge concern. Now, take a Muslim person being involved in firearms, and you walk into my shop and you're going to see rifles and handguns and these high caliber weapons sitting on the shelf. And if you didn't know any better, you would think, okay, hold on, this guy is a bit of an extremist. No, it's not the case. I'm furthest from it. I want to blanketly state right now that I do not encourage any type of extreme behavior or terrorists or extreme concept relating to ISIS or Al-Qaeda or anything else. I'm not affiliated to that type of stuff. I don't believe in it. I don't believe it has a place. I don't believe it's necessary. I think we have enough problems as it is without drawing any more negative attention to ourselves. So let's just get that out the way. I'm not an advocate for anything extreme where you need to put a turban on your head, grab an AK-47 and run down the street screaming takbir. I don't believe in any of that stuff. So anyone who, when saw the topic for tonight, was concerned that I could be one of those type of people, please understand I am the furthest you can find from that. I do want to talk about the concept of jihad, though. Let's just talk about the concept of jihad. And I want to break it down a little bit. So when you mention the word jihad globally, people are always assuming jihad with the actual fighting. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are learned, and I don't want to be disrespectful by lecturing anyone on the root words of the Arabic and its significance and its meaning. I'm not educated enough, or I'm not qualified enough to be lecturing you on that. But I have an opinion on this, and I think that you can agree or disagree with me about whether or not it's a valid point. So the word jihad by definition means to struggle. There are different types of jihad. There's the actual jihad where during the prophetic times, it would be about fighting against the enemies of Islam. There's the jihad of your nafs, fighting your temptations. I don't believe that we face all types of jihad. I think every single person in this world, Muslim or non-Muslim, fights the jihad of the nafs. We all have temptation, and that's there, right? This has nothing to do with my topic for tonight, but let's talk about the other type of jihad, fighting against the enemies of Islam. We are very fortunate we live in a very religiously tolerant place. We don't have enemies of Islam where we have to physically go and kill. But I think that whether or not it's considered jihad, it is a struggle for us where we have to constantly fight against corruption, fraud, and high crime rate. So it is a struggle. Whether or not it's politically or Islamically correct to be calling it a jihad is a different conversation altogether. But it is a struggle for us. And if we feel that we are missing out on the one type of jihad, maybe it's a case of this is what our jihad was meant to be. Maybe this is our jihad. Our jihad is to fight against crime, criminality, keep our families safe. And because we don't have the issue about going out and trying to fight for the name of Islam. We don't have those type of issues here that other countries have. And it does exist in other countries. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in the world. I'm saying it doesn't exist in South Africa. I would think that this would be our type of jihad. I wouldn't call it jihad. I wouldn't brand it and sell it and promote it on social media as everything else as being a jihad. But we can understand it for ourselves that this is our personal struggle. Our personal struggle is that we've got wives, husbands, children, parents, siblings, friends, and we want to keep them safe in one of the most dangerous countries in the world. So it's just a concept that you can marinate with. Tell me whether you agree or disagree with me about whether it is considered a jihad. Maybe somebody knows Islamically if there's any concepts that we can relate to each other. I don't know, but this is how I see it. I see it that us trying to keep our families safe in a country that is so crime-ridden, which has no end in sight, I believe that is our jihad. Islamically, once again, I am not a Islamic scholar. I don't want to be lecturing you on what Islam says about self-defense. But I can tell you confidently that it speaks about self-preservation and self-defense. And there is an allowance where you are, and I don't want to use the word kill because legally speaking, that's not the right word. You are allowed to defend yourself in Islam. And I would go one further and saying not just about being able to defend yourself. I would say that it is a compulsion on everybody to be able to defend themselves. Not physically, we'll get into that. I'm saying that everybody should have the choice to be able to defend themselves, meaning that you should have the psychological preparedness to be able to do this. And Islam promotes that. We are told, don't be a pushover, don't be a walkover. To those of you who are listening, I don't know how young or old you guys are. Whether you have wives or husbands or children or dependents in that sense. And I want you to picture if there was a situation where the dice have fallen and now you are faced with a threat of some sort. Visualize however you want it to be. You can be outside your house, inside your house. You can be at a shopping mall, and now suddenly you face a threat to your life. And notice my wording, a threat to life. I'm not saying that there is a threat to your car or your property, because legally speaking, that is a whole different context altogether. There is a threat to your life. Islam allows you to do whatever is needed to be done to be able to protect your family. I'm not saying you have to kill the person, but legally speaking, you have to stop that threat. So where I'm going with this is that Islamically, there are no limitations in terms of us being told that we have to make sure that there's more common sense than it is really an Islamic principle that you have to go and research study. It's quite evident that as Muslims, we shouldn't be soft targets, and I think that Islamically, we also have a history in terms of use of weapons. Going back to the whole story of jihad, during prophetic times, since Adam alayhi salam, there's been conflict and fighting, down to the most recent, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, they've been countless battles, and one thing they never shied away from was being able to fight. Now, once again, I'm saying that there's different types of jihad, and I'm not talking about the jihad that they went through, but I'm talking about the means that they used to defend themselves. They used to carry swords. They used to have bows and arrows. They used to have spears. They used to have shields. They used to even have armor. So it's not an unusual concept in Islam for us to be kind of affiliated to weapons. If you go to Turkey, in Istanbul, the Topkapi Museum, it's there on display for you to see. The bows and arrows of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, the swords of the Sahaba and the Prophet sallallahu, and the bows and arrows. So weapons, we've got a long history of weapons. Yes, the type of weapons we've used have changed over the years, and some of them are more efficient and some of them are a little bit more risky. I understand that, but the concept of use of weapons is not something new in Islam. From Adam alayhi salam's time, they used a rock, and down to the most modern day weapons that we have, the things have evolved. But the concept of weapons have always existed. And what you need to understand is that a weapon is a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. Unfortunately, due to media, due to Hollywood, due to movies, it's given a very bad impression. Something to think about. If firearms are bad in itself, then why do the police carry them? But yet criminals also use firearms to commit crimes. So it is a tool. Yes, what the tool does is very one-dimensional. You can't use the tool for something else. It's not a box cutter. A firearm is not a box cutter. It has one purpose only, and I always explain this to my students when I'm on the shooting range. But the intended purpose, and Islam says this as well, every action is judged by your intention. So what you intend to use it for will determine whether that tool is a good or bad tool. So please understand. However, yes, back to the point about the media and Hollywood always giving it a bad rap. Even in the news outlets, people, when they speak about firearms, people get very sensitive. And I understand that because of the things that are happening. I mean, we've had New Zealand, mass shootings in the US, but you need to look at those incidents in isolation. As much as one would like to blame the gun for those type of things, you need to look at the root cause. It was extremism. It was terrorism. The gun was just a tool. The guy could have used a bomb. The guy could have used a vehicle. People. So yes, if he didn't have a gun, he would have been less effective and so on and so forth. But what you need to understand is that the tool can be used for good or for bad. And we need to somehow break down this negative stereotype that the media has placed on firearms. And I think specifically Africa, because of our legislation and because of our culture, we have a bit more respect. Because it's not as widely used, it's not as extreme as it is in other countries. So just concepts to grasp ourselves around. I wouldn't be doing justice if I spoke about self-defense in South Africa if I didn't speak about two more aspects which are tied in with that, which I'm not going to get into today because it's not part of my topic. And that is situational awareness and physical fitness. And both of them can be tied back to Islamic roots as well. Situational awareness, what I mean by that is constantly being aware of what's happening around you, not having your blinkers on all the time, especially in a country like South Africa. We have a lot of great things about this country. And the thing about it is that we have to accept our challenges. Yes, South Africa is probably on a downward slope economically and, financially and socially and in a whole lot of different levels as well. But there's a lot of good things as well. And if we are going to stay here, we have to accept what these things are. And one of them is that we have a high crime rate and that we are constantly at risk. And we need to take measures as a community, as individuals, to ensure our safety of our family and everybody else. So even before we even start talking about firearms, people need to become more situationally aware. This serves two purposes. One is that if you don't have a firearm, it will help you evade or avoid a situation before it arises. And if you do have a firearm and you end up in a situation where you have no other option but to resist, it gives you a second or two to be able to register what's happening and react accordingly. Situational awareness is so important. How many times have you heard a person tell you a story about them sitting at a traffic light or a robot, and the story begins by, there I was at my steering wheel, and the radio was on, or I was in a cell phone, or I was just kind of minding my own business, and out of nowhere this guy came. Please understand, people don't come from out of nowhere. That person came from somewhere, and he was probably walking down from car to car looking for a soft target to be able to attack, and he found it. I'm not having a go at anybody. I'm not saying that it's that person's fault for being attacked, but something called the color codes of awareness and the color codes of preparedness. And each color represents a different state of awareness. And some important ones are white. So the color code white basically means that you're completely oblivious to your surroundings. You do not know what's happening. And unfortunately, that is the reality of most of us today. How many of us are texting while driving, constantly on the phone, not paying attention, or even in a shopping mall with our heads down, just walking where we are? I'm guilty of this as well. I'm not saying that you guys are. I'm saying that we're all guilty of it. The next one is code yellow, which means that you're kind of seeing what's happening. You're not completely switched off, but you're not completely on. And then it goes on to orange and red and black and so on. But where I wanted to just touch on was that there is an actual system of colors which represent states of awareness and preparedness, which exist, which people use to train in terms of situational awareness. That's how important these things are relating to firearms. The second thing I want to touch on top of situational awareness, I hope I've stressed that point enough, is physical fitness. With the use of a gun for self-defense in South Africa. The more physically fit you are, usually the better you will perform with the firearm, and the more able you are to be able to react to a situation if need be. Like I said, it's not my topic for today, but it's extremely important. When we do training on the range, depending what type of training it is, we try to use what we call stress-inducing techniques. So if you are meant to perform a certain drill on the shooting range, so if, for example, you have a target at 5 or 10 meters and you need to shoot the target and it's getting pretty easy for you, you would do things like physical fitness. So do a couple of push-ups, a couple of jumping jacks, get your heart rate accelerated, and now perform that same exercise with an elevated heart rate. It makes things a lot harder. That is simulating reality. When somebody is trying to hurt you, harm you, steal from you, kill you, it's happening in South Africa, you are not going to be calm. So these are the kind of factors we need to take into consideration, is that if we don't own a firearm, are we fit enough to evade a situation? Are we fit enough to fight back? Are we situationally aware to be able to tackle a problem? These are questions we need to ask ourselves. Just kind of setting the framework for where we are. So speaking about firearms, I want to quickly give you guys a brief overview. It works legally in South Africa in terms of acquiring a firearm license. This may answer some questions for some people who want to know about the legalities. How easy is it? Because a lot of the time when I have conversations with people, they want to know how easy it is to get a firearm in South Africa. Some people know it, and there's a lot of folklore. Some people seem to think it takes you 2 years. Some people believe it's too easy, and you get different views on it. One thing is for sure, it's not as easy as it is in the USA, where you can walk into a Walmart or an equivalent of Macro and walk out to the AR-15. Although I may wish for something like that, I think that it's maybe a good thing that you can't, but nonetheless, that's a conversation for another day. So in South Africa, the SAP, South African Police Service, are in charge of issuing, administrating, receiving, and anything to do with firearm licensing. They are the administrators for. So when you want to buy a firearm or license a firearm into your name, you have to apply to the South African Police. Within the police, there's a division called, or an organization called Central Firearms Registry, based in Pretoria. And these policemen's sole responsibility is to administrate applications for firearms. Every single police station in South Africa has a person whose designation or role and responsibility is a designated firearms officer, whose sole responsibility, or sometimes it has a dual responsibility, but one of their big responsibilities is to administer firearm applications at a local police station level. Meaning that if you come to me and you purchase your firearm, you need to apply for the license, this is the person you would visit. So CFR, Central Firearms Registry, they are the people responsible for administrating license applications for firearms. The legislation within the actual law of South Africa, which governs the use, licensing, and anything else to do with firearms is the Firearms Control Act of 2000. Like the name says, it was an act that came up once the new government took over, post 94, and there was an amendment done in 2004, and shortly after that it was implemented, and there was a kind of crossover between the old, I think it was the 1969s Act, and people had to reapply for licenses and move over to the new card system that was enrolled in South Africa. So the Firearms Control Act of 2000 has all the legislation that one needs to know about licensing a firearm in South Africa. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's just some background knowledge. So in South Africa, the three main ways you can license a firearm on your name for whatever purposes that you want is self-defense, sport shooting, and hunting. Those are the three big categories that we can own a firearm in South Africa under. The most popular by far is self-defense. Sport shooting is a hugely growing industry in South Africa, and there are more and more sport shooting organizations that are coming up by the day, and more people are getting involved because they enjoy it. Hunting, I mean, we are Africa after all. The safaris and hunting in general is across the board with Muslim people and non-Muslim people as well. It's extremely popular. So there is also an avenue where you can license firearms. So it's not just the self-defense industry that involves the firearms in South Africa. It's all hunting and sport. A statistic not verified, told to me by someone else in the industry who I respect a lot, who's been around a lot longer than me. In the year 2013, the firearms industry in South Africa was worth 6 billion rand. So not a small industry locally. Remember that the firearms industry ties in with a lot of other industries as well, mainly government and private sector security. When we talk government, it branches off into two avenues once again. You've got the police, which is the official police for South Africa, South African Police Service. Then you have the local municipalities and your metro polices for each different municipality. They also have to go through, this is where the private sector, gun shops like myself, would be able to service the sector. So it's not just a case of individuals coming in and buying firearms. It's at a government level where this industry will have an armed response division, which will require resources and equipment, which is where guys like us, gun shops, would come into this equation, where we have to provide materials for them. And I can tell you that due to this hunting, sport shooting, self-defense, security companies, government, it kind of, the numbers start making sense in terms of how big this industry actually is. Obviously, everything is by the book, and I'm about to give you a brief breakdown in terms of how you can license a gun in South Africa before I go more in depth into the importance. So there's two steps to licensing a gun in South Africa. I want you to think about it like a learner's license and a driver's license. They're two completely separate processes. So the learner's license process is quite similar to an actual learner's license for driving, where you have to do a set of theoretical and practical examinations, open book tests, closed book tests, and a practical shoot, where you have to physically show that you have some knowledge of safety, knowledge of handling, knowledge of how things work, knowledge of the law, knowledge of the who, when, where, why, where, and who you can use your firearm on. Once you've done this training, you are issued with a certificate from an accredited training center, which is called a certificate of proficiency. This is to say that you are proficient in owning a firearm for self-defense or whatever other purposes. It's just known as a certificate of proficiency. You then go to the police station, the designated firearms officer, to apply for what you call a competency. Now, the competency kind of sums up the entire first part of the process. That is your learner's license. So you submit an application for competency. You have to submit fingerprints. You have to pay a fee. There's a couple of other supporting documents that you have to give in. But the crux of the application is a verification of your proficiency certificate to verify that you've done your training at an accredited training center. The second thing that is done is a background check, which is why they take your fingerprints. Your application is then captured at the local police station, and it travels through the internal channels that it has up to Pretoria, to the Central Firearms Registry, where it is processed. And once everything has gone through, you then get approved and you get a certificate of competence, say you are competent to own a handgun. This process can take anywhere from 3 to 5 months. and it's quite intensive, where they verify your fingerprints. They check if you have any criminal records. If you have a criminal record of any sort, you will most likely not be able to get a firearm on your name. The competency certificate is usually valid for 5 to 10 years, depending on a couple of circumstances, which I won't get into, but that's usually the validity period for a certificate of competency. Once this is done, you've done with that for now, and you have to renew every 5 years. Now we talk about the second part of the licensing process, which is the actual gun part. So you come to see a guy like me, owns a gun shop. You walk into a gun shop. We go through the different discussions in terms of which type of gun you would like. You buy the firearm. Each firearm has a unique serial number on it. You then have to type out or prepare a motivation to kind of justify why you need this firearm. So obviously, it would depend. Your motivation would depend on whether you're licensing it for self-defense, sport shooting, or hunting, and the firearm that you purchase has to be in accordance with that. According to South African law, you cannot buy a semi-automatic rifle or a semi-automatic shotgun for self-defense purposes. You can only license a semi-automatic handgun for self-defense purposes. So once you've done with this, you go back to the police station to see the designated firearms officer once again. Once again, fingerprints are taken and you submit all your documents. It takes another 3 to 5 months, goes to the internal channel. So that's a bit of inside information in terms of how it works in South Africa. So quite a strict process, not kind of where you can just go and buy guns over the counter and go and shoot up a house or whatever the case is, or go and rob someone. And the thing is that, if a person is willing to go through all that, not very likely that they are going to be negligent with that. And so, Mishka, the government is looking at amending the Firearms Act to state you can't own more than one firearm at a time. Bheki Cele is very much a pro-free gun South Africa. Yes, okay, good question. So Bheki Cele, our beloved Minister of Police. So that was a proposed amendment a while back. Was it a year, but 2 years ago, there was a proposed amendment from the South African Police Service to government to say, listen, we would like to remove the right for individuals to own a gun for self-defense. It was never tabled. It was never even put up for discussion. It never even got to any significant phase. What had happened was that document got leaked onto social media, and as you can imagine, the backlash from there was significant. What has happened in the last 5 to 10 years, we've like anything else that evolves, and with the growing number of firearm owners in South Africa, which I want to give you a statistic quickly. It's just to answer your question. I found an article in terms of the number of firearm owners in South Africa. So currently, at the moment, a guesstimate according to this article, there are 3 million gun owners in South Africa. 3 million out of a population of 50 million. I mean, that's significant, given that the majority of our population are living below a certain threshold. Obviously, they are not expected to be owning firearms, but I'm talking about the middle to upper class people. 3 million. Okay, yes, of course, this is across hunting, self-defense, and so on. But I mean, that is a significant number in South Africa. So just a little bit of information. So back to my point. So what has happened was, as the industry has evolved, we started forming organizations to kind of lobby. Now, I don't like to use this word lobby, because then it kind of seems like you're a bit biased in terms of what your objectives are as an organization. But nonetheless, organizations fighting for rights for firearm owners. And I'm a huge advocate for this. The reason is because, like I mentioned before at the beginning, if you don't know how bad things are in South Africa, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the evidence is there. Every time you switch the news on, open a newspaper, open social media, there's an article about a person who's been attacked, murdered, kidnapped, hijacked, robbed. You don't even have to go to the news. You just speak to your friends, speak to your family. Anybody can tell you about issues they've had. So I'm completely against the fact that they would want to take firearms away for self-defense purposes. I think that individuals need to be given the opportunity to defend themselves. The reality is that the police force, and it's funny coming from Minister Cele himself, is that they are completely inadequate. I think that I probably know a little bit more information about the police force given my industry, but there are enough articles out there to support. I actually found another one, not linked directly to your question, but it's about how inefficient the police are in terms of, in the last 6 years, the police have lost more than 4,000 firearms. it's such a big responsibility. You go through such a procedure to license it, and you know what it's capable of. How do you lose something like that? Was it stolen? Was it sold onto the black market? And this has happened in the past. It was posted on official SAPS websites where they had busted cops in. They're trying to fix one problem by creating another. So I agree that the crime rates are high. I agree that there's too many. The levels of gun crime are too high. But how is strengthening legal gun ownership fixing the illegal gun problem? I don't understand how those two are even correlated. Evidence suggests that, and I'm sure I may be answering a question that's further down by Aisha, is that most of the crimes being committed are not committed by legal gun owners. Yes, you're going to have your odd occasion, your Oscar Pistorius who's going to make news for a year because he decided to shoot his girlfriend, but that's an isolated incident. He was a guy who was. There were previous stories that came out, before that about how he actually wasn't of stable mental condition. But my point is that most of the crimes committed are committed with illegal firearms, which has no relation or correlation to legal gun ownership.